Welcome everybody to this webinar. My name is Sean with JDS Industries. This is a webinar that's going to show you how to create some dynamic images, whether you're doing some images for the web, whether you're doing sublimation printing or any kind of full color printing. This is going to show you how to take a photograph that's maybe not quite as desirable or has some flaws in it and improve it beyond the typical enhancements. So we're going to talk about flat adjustments and the techniques we use, may have used in the past or ones I used in the past and sometimes still do. We'll take a look at what a flat adjustment is and what a merge mode is and explain some of the merge modes and why they are superior to flat adjustments, and also talk about how we enhance those photos using those merge modes. And then we'll do a little experimenting too. If you would like to kind of play along as I do these adjustments, I welcome you to go ahead and open up PHOTOPAINT and open up any photograph that you might have available if you want to follow along. I'm going to go slow to start with, and then I'm going to do this in real time to show you just how quickly we can make adjustments and make really cool improvements to photographs. All right, so what is a flat adjustment? Well, as you see, I've got 4 photographs here, and they're all relatively different. So I've got a person, I've got an aerial photograph, I've got another landscape, and I've got an object vehicle here. And each one of these has their own issues. So I'm going to show you how what a flat adjustment is on a particular photo here, and then I'll show you, and then we'll go into the merge modes and explain that. So I'm going to switch over to CorelPHOTOPAINT. This picture was taken last year when I still had my iPhone 4S. And for those of you who've had the iPhone 4S, you'll know it's not the greatest camera in the world, especially in poor lighting conditions. But at the time I had to take a picture with what I had. And so this is my daughter in one of these old wooden Carousel wheels, steam operated. And it was a lot of fun. And I really love this picture, but the quality was pretty bad. So it was dark underneath this canopy and it was really bright outside. So I had some real tricky lighting conditions. And if I was trying to improve this photograph with flat adjustments, I just can't get it done very well. But let me show you what I would typically call a flat adjustment. So if I were to try to improve some contrast issues, you can see the image is kind of flat, it's pretty grainy, there's some dark areas, some problem areas, some real blown out areas in these windows. So how do we fix those? Well, if you're using just flat adjustments, you typically go up to adjust and find one of these adjustments up here. Maybe it's auto balance, tone curve, brightness and contrast, gamma. Any number of these will improve the photograph somewhat, but they're all flat adjustments. So if I bring up brightness and contrast, for instance, if I wanted to add some contrast to this photo, it does improve the photo, but areas that didn't need to be improved are now blown out. So if you can see this in this mane here of this horse, all the details are lost when I start to add contrast. So some areas are improving, but other areas are getting worse. And same thing with brightness. If I bring the brightness down, I can get more detail in this mane and possibly decrease some of these blown out areas in the windows. And they're not really windows, they're just open areas where the sun's coming through. But you can see that it's treating all the pixels in this photograph, which there are thousands, it's treating them all with the same percentage of change. So as I increase brightness, it increases all areas of this photograph. And so areas that might have been okay are now blown out. Adding contrast does the same thing. It turns areas into extremes, so white areas become whiter, dark areas become darker. Intensity, it's basically adding gamma, and again, it's going to do it with the same percentage over the whole image. So that's what I call a flat adjustment. And those adjustments work okay if you have a really good photograph, but this has a lot of problems. Also, if you're looking for where most of these flat adjustments are, the ones we typically use, you can go up to Adjust and go to Image Adjustment Lab. So let's open this up. I'm going to zoom in here a bit, and I'm going to split the screen. So this is my original, and as I make adjustments, you'll see these on the right. So if I want to warm up the picture, I can move these sliders and warm up the picture. I can cool it down. I can auto adjust. And sometimes on a good photo, a decent photo, auto adjust is really all you need. It doesn't make much of a difference here once I auto adjust. I can set the white balance, so I can pick a very white area and then set the black to a very dark area, and it will try to adjust everything in between those white and black areas as far as the tone. And that does okay, but again, still a bunch of areas that have trouble. If I move the brightness, again, it's not really any different than opening up the brightness and contrast before. This is the same adjustments, and it's a flat adjustment. I do have a little bit more control over here because I can do highlights where I can grab specific ranges of color and tone and modify them, but I'm still just grabbing ranges of color. So again, there's areas that need help where I just can't help them. So let's take a look at merge modes. I'm going to close this out. Merge modes, there are several. There's a lot of merge modes, and I only really use about a handful. So if you're familiar with Photoshop, they're called blend modes in Photoshop. In CorelPHOTOPAINT, they're called merge modes. And Photoshop and CorelPaint share a lot of the same merge modes, but each has some of their own. These are some that exist in both worlds. Normal, add, multiply, screen, overlay, soft light, hard light, dodge, color burn, and color. These are some common ones. I don't use most of these. I typically only use screen, overlay, soft light, and normal. Sometimes add, and sometimes multiply. So these top ones are the ones I use most of all. The ones I'm going to use today for all the photographs that we're going to take a look at are normal, screen, overlay, and soft light. With those four merge modes, you can do just about everything you need to do with most photographs as far as improving the quality. All right, but it's rather than try to explain what each of these do, I'm going to show you what they do. So let's move back over to PhotoPaint. All right, so I've got two layers here. This top layer is just a color gamut with shades of gray and a range of colors from the entire spectrum here. Well, not the entire spectrum, but a good swath of the spectrum. So as I move this around, you can see that this top layer, which is my grays and my color gamut, that's on top of my background layer. And if I move the top layer away, you can see there's Mount Rushmore in the background. I'm in normal mode right now, so it completely covers the bottom layer. So Object 2 is my top layer, and it's in normal mode, and it's in 100% opacity. So in this, if you click on this little slider here, you can actually reduce the amount of opacity of that top layer, so you can kind of reveal what's beneath. And you can do this with any merge mode that you select. So I'm in normal mode right now. But to see what some of these other modes do, the nice thing about PhotoPaint is you can actually just hover over any one of these merge modes to see what happens. Add adds light. It multiplies the bottom layer and the top layer. So in an RGB mode, the higher the number, the brighter the image. So it's multiplying the bottom layer with the top layer, but it's doing so individually with each pixel. So it's not doing a flat adjustment. And the way I explain merge modes is that they can apply various color calculations between two layers to produce a new color with each individual pixel that's on top of another pixel. So depending on whether the pixel is lighter or darker or what tone it is, the top layer does a certain adjustment just for that color. And it'll do different things depending on which merge mode you choose. So that's why merge modes are great, because it looks more realistic when you apply those changes. It doesn't look like just a total flat adjustment. It's a very tailored adjustment for the photograph. So some of these modes are going to be more relevant to others. So here's add, which brightens. And I'm going to just scroll through these and list them off as I come through them. Subtract is one. Difference, multiply, that's a darkening. Divide, lighter than, if darker than. Texturize, color. Hue, saturation. Lightness, invert. Some of the logic ones. Behind, screen, which has a lightening and a slightly contrasting effect. Overlay, which is another contrast. Blend, soft light, it's a contrast blend, but it's a little more subtle. Hard light, color dodge, color burn, exclusion, red, green, blue. Now again, some of these you're probably never going to use, and I would encourage you to try them out and see how they work, but we're only going to work with a few. So soft light, overlay, screen, and normal. Those are the four that we're going to work with today. All right, so that's merge modes. Let's go over to my daughter on the carousel. So when I do merge modes, I'm really only doing about 4, but I might have multiple layers where I duplicate the effect. So the first thing I'm going to do is take this layer and duplicate it. Now I can right click on this layer and select duplicate. The shortcut is Control D. And since I know that I need about 9 layers here, I'm just going to hit the Control D an extra 8 times to give me 9 layers. Now as I go through this, you're going to say, well, this is a lot of work to produce this, but I'm going to go slow. I'm going to start with to explain what things are happening and how they're happening, and then we'll do a photograph in real time, so you can see just how quickly you can do this once you have the formula down. All right, so these little eyes here, these are controlling what you see. So as I turn these off, you're not going to see these layers. Now these are all the same. These are just a copy of the original. So they're all the exact same layers, one on top of the other. And the one I want to mess with is the very next layer, object 2. In PhotoPaint, they're called objects, not layers, but I call them layers. This first one, I will do a flat adjustment, and this will be the only flat adjustment I do. So I'm going to do what's called a vibrance, and I like to label these as I do them because I might go back and tweak these, and I want to know what layer is doing what. So I'm going to label this one vibrance, and I'm going to go up to this adjustment layer and do the vibrance. And you might say, why vibrance and not saturation? Well, saturation is a pretty extreme change, and I don't really see that being a very helpful tool. Vibrance is actually more subtle and I think more intuitive as far as how to adjust. Even at 100%, you can see it's not too extreme. But I'm going to click OK. Now I might not need all of that vibrance. I might not. But the nice thing is I've got this control up here. So this is my vibrance layer, and I've got it at 100% opacity. At any time, I can come up and reduce its effect. Okay. So I'm going to keep it at 100% right now. Now this layer right here is affecting, and what you're seeing is the effect of this layer on top of the original layer. So these two combined are what you see now. Now if I turn on this layer here, if I click on it and click the eye, what you're seeing is the original again, or a duplicate of the original. And you're not seeing anything underneath because it's in normal mode. If I reduce the opacity of this layer, now you see the vibrance layer below it. Okay, but if I keep it in normal mode, now I'm just seeing a duplicate of the original photo. But I'm going to make some changes in this one. So in this one, I'm going to do some sharpening. I'm going to call this high pass and soft light. And high pass is an effect that what it does, it finds edges of things and sharpens the image. So as I zoom in here, you can see that this photograph is extremely grainy and not very good. So all these areas are not well defined. Hair just kind of blends into skin tones, and the eyes are not real sharp. So this is This is a tough photograph to improve just because it's such a poor quality. It's okay if it's zoomed out a little ways, it's okay. But if I want to blow this image up at all, you can't see much detail in here at all. So the way to help improve that is to use the high pass effect in soft light mode. So right now I'm in normal mode. So you're going to see what this looks like in normal mode. I'm going to go to Effects, Sharpen, High Pass. And there's a couple sliders here. I'm going to do the maximum effect. So here's how it finds edges. If I reduce the radius, you can see it's finding edges. So I'm going to do it at its maximum. I'm going to click OK. And now I'm going to change this to soft light. So we're going to watch this layer kind of blend in to the layer below it. Okay. Now, if I want to see what effect that layer has, all I have to do is turn this layer off, and I can see what was below. So you can already see that this image is starting to sharpen up a little bit. All right, let's keep it on. Now, if I want to increase the details, I can actually just duplicate this layer. So if I do Control D, now I've duplicated that layer. I've just intensified the exact same thing. If I duplicate it again, it keeps intensifying. Now, at some point, it gets to be a little too sharp, and it even starts to bring out too many pixels. So you can improve this to a point in the sharpening, but I think I'm going to back off on that a little bit. And in this layer, so I'm going to turn this actual layer off. This layer, I'm going to just drop the effect down a little bit. All right, so that's as far as I'm going to sharpen this. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Okay, so now I've got some areas of this photograph that are really dark up here, blown out over here. I got some glares coming in from outside onto this horse, and there's just some areas that are just, the details are just lost. So the next layer, so these are all my sharpen, 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 sharpen. This layer here is going to be my overlay layer. So I'm in normal mode right now. If I turn it on, that covers everything. And now what you're seeing is just a duplicate of the original again. So if I turn it off, here's all the effects that we've done so far. That's the original. Okay, so now I'm going to change this normal mode to overlay. And this has the effect of adding contrast, but it's not a flat adjustment. It does so smartly, and it's tailored for every single pixel. So it does something different depending on how light the pixel is underneath and how dark the pixel is on top. And because we're basically on top of the exact same photograph underneath, it does so in a very realistic way. Now, this is a little too much contrast, so I'm going to reduce this to about 70%. Now, as I go through this, I've already baked this cake a long time ago, so I've done a lot of adjusting with this. So as I go through this, it might look a little weird as I go through these layers, and you might say, well, that doesn't really look good. But it's going to be a cumulative effect. So as I go through all these layers and finish, you'll see that it's a cumulative effect of all these layers together is going to produce a much better image. So let's go to the next layer. Let's label this one Overlay. This next one I'm going to call Screen. So I'm just double clicking on these, or click and then click again to change the name here. I'm going to call this one the Screen. This has the effect of brightening the image in sort of a contrasting way. So I click on that one. You can see how it brightened up, but I'm still in normal mode. So let's make sure we change the actual mode. The mode doesn't change just because I changed the name. All right, so there's my screen. Now that's having a negative effect on some areas. So looks like I may not need much of this. I'm going to bring this down to about 30, 20% maybe. All right. Next layer. This is one where I adjust for what I call atmospheric blue. Anytime I take a photo with my phone, especially if I do a landscape, I see the atmosphere, the blue atmosphere, kind of influencing my entire photograph. So a lot of times it'll look like there's kind of a blue haze across my photos. This is going to combat that. So this is what I'm going to call the color balance soft light layer. All right, I'm going to turn that on. We're back to just a duplicate of the original. And for this one, I'm going to actually desaturate the image. So if I go to adjust and click on desaturate, that pulls all the hues out of the image and renders everything gray. Now I can still add color to this. So I haven't changed the actual mode of this photograph. It's just pulled out the color in this layer. Then I'm going to go back and add some color. So I'm going to go to color balance. And if I hit the reset, I'm just going to warm it up a little bit, add a little bit of red and a little bit of yellow to give it kind of a sepia tone effect. And then I'm going to put that into soft light. So it's going to blend those colors into the photograph, again, in a very natural way with soft light. Okay, now if I turn that on and off, you're going to see quite a change, especially in the skin tones. Zoom in a little bit, turn off, on. All right, now also the other effect that soft light does is it does add contrast. I don't think I need quite this much, so I'm going to bring it maybe halfway down. And the nice thing about doing this in PhotoPaint, you can save this file as a PhotoPaint file and come back to this and change any of these layers at any time, anytime you want. So if let's say you print this off and you say, well, something happened and I didn't like the way this turned out, I can always go back and adjust any of these layers. These are not destructive layers, so you can go back and edit them at any time, as long as you save it as a Corel PhotoPaint file. All right, the next layer is going to be a custom brush. And I'm going to zoom out just a little bit here. Now I can see that there's areas that are just not very sharp yet because there's a glare going on all over here, but I want to add some sharpness to the black paint and some other areas, and also lighten areas up here in the canopy. I can do that with a brush tool, but I need to be in soft light mode. Actually, I'm going to show you what happens if you're in normal mode with the brush. So let's say I take my paintbrush right here, and I like getting a big fuzzy brush. I'm going to go 400 on my nib size. My transparency is at 90%, so that means the changes that I make are going to be very incremental. My feather is at 100%, so that gives me a nice big soft edge. So there's going to be no hard edges as I move through here. So everything's going to look fairly realistic. So I've got my paintbrush, I've got my color I want is going to be my fill color, and my foreground color I want to be black. So let's move our slider all the way to the corner, black. And you can see the RGB 000, that's the darkest black. Now if I take this brush, and they need to be on this layer, it needs to be turned on in order to do anything with it. If I took this brush and just started painting black, you can see its effect that's not what we want, but that's what would happen if you were in normal mode. So let's undo that, Control Z. Let's put this in soft light. Okay. Now if there's some areas in this horse that I want to darken, and back here, I'm just going to start clicking, tapping. I'm going to increase the opacity a little bit. Let's go 50% so you can see the change. Okay, so that has the effect of just darkening some of these areas right here that have a pretty serious glare. Maybe there's an extra glare over here I want to get rid of. Some of this canopy stuff. But then now there's some dark areas up here that I want to correct because I've used soft light a few times in here and that has a contrasting effect, and so it's made some extremes. I'm going to go back up and change this to a white brush. And let's go, I'm just going to add a new layer. So go down here and add new object or a layer. So this has nothing in it, it's an empty space, and all I'm going to do is just add white. So let's take our brush. I like the nib size. I'll keep the opacity the same. Big feather. And let's go ahead and swap these around so that I have a white brush. In normal mode, this is what happens. We don't want that. Let's go into soft light. As I move through here, you can see details up in the canopy start to come through. And even some areas in here that got kind of blown or got kind of darkened as I was making these adjustments, I can bring all those back if I just tap. Some of the areas that got too dark, let's go back in and tap. And it's a nice way to bring back all the details that got lost. All right, now I think I like what I've done here, but occasionally I want to go back and just kind of see, if I really need a lot of these layers. Maybe on one particular layer I'm going to reduce its effect. Oops, I want to keep that one. This one maybe I want to reduce the amount of contrast. Maybe I want to add some more light, brighten things up. So I can go back and change any one of these. I can also duplicate any one of these layers to increase its effect. But let's take a look and see what the cumulative effect of all of these layers are. So you're seeing it now. Now let's go back and see what the original looked like just by clicking up here. This is a copy of the original. And if I turn this layer on, that's the original. So pretty flat. Look how much more dynamic that image is. I'm much happier with this image now than I was with this. And it really didn't take that long. Basically, I have a combination of a few different layers. It's the vibrance, it's the high pass with creating the details, the overlay for the contrast, the brightness, the sepia layer or the color balance layer that's combating the blue hue, a little custom brush with black and with white. I don't think I like this layer. And that's all it is. Basically those four. And again, I could never have gotten this good with flat adjustments. Let's take a look at the original. If I had just done auto adjust, or if I had just done a image adjust, the best I could have done with this image would be to add some contrast, mess with the shadows a little bit. Maybe I would have gone in and do some color balance, but really I'm just doing flat adjustments. So areas that look good go bad, areas that are bad go good. So it's really tough to adjust with flat layers. Now let's go back to the adjustment. We'll open up the finished product. Okay. So that's the original with about as much adjustment as I can do with flat adjustments. Here it is with all the adjustments combined. Okay. So much more dynamic picture. Now let's do this with another photograph that's a little different. And you can see that it's really about the same layers, just using a little different way. This is a photograph that I took when flying to Baltimore last year, and it was just right. I like taking pictures from airplanes. So as the plane kind of banked, the sun was off the other side of the plane, so it was there was no harsh glares, but it was going through a pretty clean window, but it was still a pretty crummy image. So how do we fix this? Same way we did the other one. So I'm going to go through and turn off all these layers. So again, the first layer I did was the vibrance. So I just increased the vibrance a little bit. You can't even see, I only have this set at about 11. So I didn't really make much of a change there. The next layer was my high pass, and I did 2 of those. So you can see it's already sharpening a little bit. Then I did something called an inverted blur on this one. And I'm going to explain this one a little bit. That's what an inverted blur looks like. So with this layer, I'm going to duplicate. Put that up here. So this is a copy of the original. I'm going to show you what the desaturated inverted blur soft light is. So in this layer, if I go to adjust, desaturate, basically turn it into a black and white, then I go to image, and I transform, and I invert the color so it creates a negative. And then I go to effects, and I blur, and you do the Gaussian blur, about 9 pixels worth, because I don't want any hard edges when I do this. So when I change this from a normal to a soft light mode, what that does is it adds lightness to the dark areas and darkness to the light areas. So let's go and do that. All right, now it looks a little weird right now, but again, you can control the effect that has right here with the slider. I'm going to turn that off because I've already done it in this layer right here. Turn that on. It's only about 50% opacity. Here's my overlay, so that's my contrast. Here's my screen for the brightness. It's only at about 4%. I had pretty good light here. And you can see the blue hue is really affecting this image greatly. So when I add the sepia tone, or this, when I'm warming up this picture, that one has a nice effect. This next layer is just a total black layer. And let me show you how to create that. So if you want to, you can just create a new layer. And if I do a Control A, or just select everything, I make sure that my fill down here is black, which it is. And then I just use my fill tool and click. And then I go from normal mode to soft light. All right, now that has the effect of just kind of making all the colors a little more rich and creating a little more contrast, but I'm going to bring it down just a little bit. And then I went in and I did my custom brush, where I took my big fat brush, 400 nib size, 50% opacity, big feather, and I just started tapping in areas that I thought needed a little extra help. So let me turn on what that looked like. So as I turn that on, I just covered some areas I thought had a little extra glare to them. Here's my original layer. So let's go back to that and see what that looks like. That's the original. That's after all the layers. I'm going to zoom in here just so you can see just how much detail and clarity is added to this. Okay, I can almost see individual leaves. I mean, not quite, but almost. Let's go back to the original. Pretty flat, pretty lifeless. And that's with all the layers combined. Turn off a couple of these sharpening layers. You'll see the image I probably don't need as many sharpening layers in here because it's a it's a little aerial photograph, so nothing is going to be super sharp anyway. But yeah, a huge improvement over that. All right, let's do this one more time, but I'm going to show you, we're going to take something to an extreme. Show you how to have a little more fun. So this is more than just improving a photograph, it's actually taking this to the extreme. So I go to Montana about once a year because I have relatives in Montana. And going through Montana is like driving through a postcard. But again, iPhone 4, driving across Montana, this image, in my mind, the way I remember it, is not the way this looked. So it was a beautiful day, but it had this really interesting cloud formation, and the sagebrush was, I mean, everything was in crisp detail, but my camera didn't pick up any of that. So when I got back, I said, I want to take this picture and do something with it. So this is how extreme or how cool you can manipulate a photo to make it look almost nothing like what it was before. Especially if you have clouds in your photograph, this is a lot of fun. So first layer, again, there's my vibrance layer, that's my flat, and I've got it at about halfway. I'm just going to turn that on. So now you can see that it's richened up a little bit, a little more saturated. These are my detail layers. So this is the high pass layer that increases detail. I've got that 4 times on here. So I'm going to turn all these on. All right, now you can start to see individual pebbles on the road. The fence line comes through. All the different sagebrush comes through. All the individual clouds. You can see all the edges of the clouds come through. Here's my desaturated inverted layer. That's where I pulled a negative and blurred it and did it in a soft light. Let's turn that on. And that's not to a huge effect. It's only at 20%. Overlay layer. This is my contrast. Okay, now things are starting to sharpen up a little bit even more. Here's my screen layer. I'm going to turn that on. This is at 60%. You might say, well, that just got blown out a little bit. Yeah, it did, but this is an adjustment I made after all these layers were done together. So I came back later and adjusted the screen because all these additional layers kind of darkened it. So, and you'll see as I turn these on how it's going to darken again. So this is my sepia tone, or my warming up of the image, because you can see it's really kind of got that blue cast again from the atmosphere. Turn that on, and that one really makes a nice change in here. This one is just a duplicate of that layer, so let's turn that on. Okay, this is how I'm starting to remember that day. This is pretty much how it looked as I was driving down the road. These extra layers up here, this is where I just have fun. So the next layer, I added just black, all 100% black to the top of this sky, which you can do just by selecting. If you wanted to select a big swath of it, you could just do a fill and add black, or you could do it incrementally with the paintbrush, any way you want to do it. Here's a paintbrush with a black fill, 400 nib, 50% transparency, 100% feather. And so if I go through it, I have to turn that on too. So I turn that layer on, and you can see the change that I already made there because I'd already done this layer. But if I wanted to add more, I've got white selected. I need to switch this over so that the white is, or the black is in the foreground. And I can darken areas. Now it's doing it very incrementally because I've only got 50% opacity, or transparency rather. But I can use that black brush to just slowly darken in areas. So that layer is almost all black. But because it's in soft light, it's a very subtle change, and it's a very smart contrast. All right, so so I duplicated that layer earlier. Let's turn that on. Okay, now we're getting really dark. This is not how this day was, but you can see how just adding some layers of darkness in that soft light mode creates a really moody effect. The other thing I did was to add a little bit of red in the background. So I took my brush and I changed my brush to a red layer. Clicked OK, and I just kind of dabbed in here. So I'm going to turn that layer on. You can see the redness in there where the sun's peeking through. And this is where I start to sound like Bob Ross, where hey, look at what I did here. I'm just going to add a little bit of light and dark in here. Okay, here's a layer where I added white, all white to the road and the sagebrush right here. And I did that again. I did this in overlay, so a little more extreme contrast. I could do it in soft light too to bring it back, but I like the way it affected in overlay. And then this is a blue layer, so I took a brush and I made a blue layer up here. So I'm going to turn that on, show you what that looked like. So it kind of changed the clouds from a kind of a gray to a blue. I'm going to add a little bit more red in here. So I'm going to add a layer. Just going to dump it in right here. Take my paintbrush. I've got red. Red is selected. Click OK. And I'm going to reduce my brush a little bit to 300. My opacity is set for 50. That might be a little much, but we'll see. Now I'm just going to start tapping in areas where the sun is poking through the clouds here. Okay, now this is in normal mode, so we don't want that. Let's go to soft light. And a little too extreme. I'm going to take this a little more opacity. Let's go 90%. Just start tapping. You can see that sun is now really affecting these clouds. Maybe it's poking through over here. And you can see the changes look pretty realistic, and you can do some really amazing things. You can go to extremes too if you want. If I want to do this all over, that's a little too extreme. But you can do just some subtle changes to your sky to make them broody and moody. This is a lot of fun. So if you want, this could be a real time waster, but it really is a way to enhance your photographs very easily, quickly. And it only takes really, I mean, it looks like a lot of layers, but it's actually mostly just repeating a lot of the same 4 layers on every photograph. Again, vibrance, detail, contrast, brightness, the sepia tone with the soft light, adding some more contrast with black, some custom black painting. It's really just that simple. But let's take a look and see what happens. And this is with mostly just repeating the photograph on top of each other or adding some brush strokes. But let's take a look and see what happens when we do 2 completely different photographs. So this is kind of fun as well. I'm going to close this, and we're going to open. I go into car shows, and I like checking out some of the old vehicles. This is actually a pretty decent photograph. It was a nice day, a little overcast, so nothing is blown out. I'm going to also open a background image. One day in the middle of January, I took a picture of one of my windows that had frosted over, and that was the image that I got. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to copy this, so I'm going to select all, which is Control A, Control C is copy, and then I'm going to go back to here, and I'm going to go Control V or paste, assuming I copied it correctly. Let's go back here, copy, paste. So if I paste it, it dumps it automatically onto the layer above. So I've got my background layer, which is the truck, and the top layer, which is my frosty window. Now if I put that frosty window into, so it's in normal mode right now, so I can reduce its opacity, but it's really just kind of creating a screen. So not the greatest effect, but watch when I put it in soft light or even overlay. soft light. Okay, now you can see how that top layer is kind of blended in with the bottom layer. It kind of has a cool effect on the paint job. Now if I wanted to do a really cheap and dirty mask, I could just erase the areas where I didn't want the top layer. Let's say I changed my nib to 400. Now you can see I can just remove this top layer of the frosty window from the tire, the bumper. So it's only, I can make it so it only affects really just the paint job. Remove all this. Now, if I were really doing this for real, I'd probably take a little more time and really mask this off appropriately. Now I'm going to turn this layer on and off again so you can kind of see the effect of that frosty layer on the paint. Kind of cool. Let's try that with another photograph. Close this one here. Let's take this photograph here. Mount Rushmore, this is my state, western side. Now I'm going to go and open up another background or another image. Take this rustic flag, select everything, copy it, paste it on top of Mount Rushmore. Oops, wrong one. Copy, paste. Okay, so now we have the American flag on top. I'm going to put this into soft light again, so it blends in with the background. You can see what it's going to do. I can do overlay too, it's a little more extreme, but I like soft light. And so it just puts the American flag right into that image. And it does so in a very smart way. If this was in normal mode, and all I did was just reduce the opacity, you can see it does not look as good. But once I change that to overlay or soft light, it does a much better job of blending in with the layer below. Again, if I wanted to just have it in the sky, I could do a really sloppy job of just deleting part of this layer, the flag layer, so that really all that's exposed is just, so it's just in the sky, basically. That's a really quick way to do it. So now I just have the flag in the sky. Now, one thing I should mention, when you're working with merge modes, the more layers you add, the larger this file becomes. So one photograph could be 2 gigabytes, but once you've added 9, 10 layers, now you've taken that 2 gigabytes and changed it to 20 gigabytes. So the files can get really big. And so if you're going to use this in production, I would recommend you maybe save the CorelPHOTOPAINT file. So you save these layers. So if I go to do a save as, CPT or CorelPHOTOPAINT is what you want to use to save your layers. And then you can always come back and adjust. But if you actually want to use it in production, then you'd probably want to flatten the image. So for this, to flatten the image, you'd go to Object and combine all objects with the background. So any layers that are turned on with the eye, you can see anything with the eye that's turned on, it'll flatten it. And now it's mashed those 2 layers together. And then you probably want to go back and do a save as and change it to maybe a PNG or a JPEG, something like that. And that will make sure that the file you have is now small enough so it's not going to interfere with the printing process, or it's not going to choke your computer down. Let's do some Q&A. I know you guys have kind of been patient with me, watching me, probably anxious to ask some questions. What button did you choose the merge mode, or how did you choose the merge mode? Okay, so going back, merge modes, basically you just, once you duplicate the layer, Control D, you add that second layer, that's when you get the option to change the mode. So if I go up and now I change this to soft light or add, that's when that becomes available. Once you create the second layer, then you get that. This actual window right here is controlled by Control F7, I believe. Or is it F8? Yeah, F7. Control F7 will turn an object manager on and off. Good question. Somebody says, this is way over my head. Okay, yeah, there's a lot of stuff I just threw at you. And how do we start learning? I think one of the best ways, if you're just starting out, trying to understand CorelPHOTOPAINT or CorelDRAW, is actually in the help menu. So if you're connected to the internet and you click on your help menu, you can go to take a tour, kind of learn what's new in here, highlight what's new, but they also have video tutorials. So you can go in here and search everything from soup to nuts to find all kinds of things. You can go through the entire program, or you can select and choose what you want to learn about. That's where I would start, right there. And then maybe go to a couple trade shows, read some trade magazines. We're always trying to educate the public on how to use these tools, because they really are a lot of tools that I probably will never get to. I use 10% of this program 90% of the time, but there are a lot of things you can do. Yes, everything we're doing in PhotoPaint can be done in Photoshop. Tools are just kind of located in a little different spot. Things are called something else, but these layers, these merge modes or blend modes in Photoshop have been around forever. Maybe not forever, but they've been around a long time. So even if you have an older version of CorelDRAW, CorelPaint, older versions of Photoshop, they all still exist. A question about the editability. So let me close this file here and this one. When I go to open, so I've created like for the airplane shot, here you can see the CorelDRAW file. This is the one that has all the layers still intact. This is just the original file. So when I go to open this, if I save it as CorelPaint, again, I've got all the layers that still exist here. So I can go back at any time and adjust any of these layers, but I can also flatten them. So again, you go into Object, combine all objects with background to flatten everything that has an eye on it. So it'll merge all those layers together, and then you can save it as a PNG, JPEG, whatever. Sublimation always looks a bit brighter than our UV printer. Well, that could be for a couple of reasons. One is because sublimation is a combination of the background and the ink you apply, which is a dye, and it's semi-translucent. So most of the products you buy for sublimation are white, and white is a very reflective color. So sublimation is often very vivid. With a direct print, if you are printing on something that's relatively dark, it actually doesn't matter as much what you're printing on, because your ink is covering the product. Even though you might lay down a layer of white primer, white primer may not be doesn't have the opacity that maybe a product that already started white is. I guess that's the best way to explain it. But UV ink covers the product, where sublimation combines itself with the product. But I do appreciate everybody who has attended. And as always, if you guys have any questions about CorelDRAW, PhotoPaint, Photoshop, whatever it is, sublimation, we do a lot of these things on a daily basis. So if we don't know the answer, we'll definitely try to research it and answer it for you. So until next time, I hope you can enjoy the merge modes, and we hope to see you at the next webinar. Thanks.